The first thing that's on your frustration list is going to be, my low end sucks balls. So that's almost always the same thing. Hey everybody, what's up? Welcome to Production Music Live. My name is Guido. I'm over from Cat and Beats, and today we're going to be talking about 11 tips in Ableton 11. All right, so 11 tips in no particular order, and it's coming from a mixing perspective. So when you finished your production and you're like, okay, I need to mix my track. How am I going to do that? And what are the tools to begin with? Well, here's tip number 1. All the tools that you need are over in audio effects. Luckily enough, Ableton has already put this in a really nice little mapped folder. Instead of in Ableton 10 and 9, whatever, you had this massive list of all these plugins. You're just like, what am I supposed to do with this? I don't really understand. And now you can go, well, I've listened back to my song. I feel that my kick drum is a little bit too boomy. How am I going to take care of that? Or I think that my bass doesn't have any stereo imaging on it, or is very mono, or is too this or too that. How am I going to, fix that? Well, Ableton has now given you a quick little answer to every single problem that you might have when it comes to mixing. Tip number 2. Before you start diving into this and be like, oh, I'm going to do that, I'm going to drive that on there and put this and put that. Before you dive into that, what I want you to do, tip number 2, is get a pen and a paper or a text edit or maybe a notepad or whatever. Listen back to your whole song and write down all the little problems that you might have with your track. You write down like, okay, at bar 93, a snare drum comes in and it is too much of a whatever, like too much harshness coming through. It doesn't sit in the mix. Write those things down. And then from there, you're going to get solutions, which you can then apply with this. Now, obviously, if you're a bit more of a beginner, then you don't know these solutions. So what we're going to do today for tip number 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, 10, and 11 is go through some of these folders. And I'm going to give you some really common things that you might find after you've listened to your song and you've compared it to a reference song, for instance. I've taken that by now you've already have a frustration list of why your mix is annoying and not working. Let's go through that frustration list. The first thing that's on your frustration list is going to be, my low end sucks balls. So that's almost always the same thing. So let's go over that and I'll give you a quick tip. So how can you fix your low end in your track really fast? Well, you have something here called dynamics. Dynamics means to control volume. What we want to do is we want to start thinking about compression. Now, we have a glue compressor or a compressor over here. The glue compressor has less options, which means it's more difficult to mess up your mix. So let's say that in your overall of your track, your low end is just not really working. So we have this track here right now, which sounds pretty good because I already mixed it. This was before. Okay, so how do you get your low end to be nice? Well, let's work on that and let's put it on the master. I've already set it up here. What you do is you get yourself a glue compressor. Boop, there she is. And if you want a thicker but more controlled bottom, what you can do is open up this little button here. Whoosh. Get your EQ out. Now, what you do here is hit this filter type, and then you set it specifically to the frequency of the fundamental of the kick drum. Your what? Here, check it out. So if we go over to the kick drum and we just solo the kick, if I open up a node, I can move it over to the fundamental of the kick drum, which for some stupid reason is at 39 hertz. And I put this at 50 hertz. So we're going to put it for the fundamental of the kick drum. Over here, go 39 hertz. Then set my threshold down. Now, what I like is an attack time of about 10 and a release time of about 2. That should give you the solution to where you're going to end up. And play this while the mix is playing back. Get some gain. Now, this is in fact reducing the entire signal, but we are focusing on the low end in a way, but just squeezing it just a tad so that the whole signal gets a little bit thicker. press it a little bit more, it's a little bit too much. There you go. That's a nice and easy way to control your low end if you find that your low end is a bit excessive. All of a sudden your top end comes more alive and it becomes a little bit more smooth. Now, the same thing goes for the top end. So this is kind of like tip number 4 already, but let's just call it 3.8 so you guys get some more tips. So here we've done this side chaining in here, and here we're doing the side chaining as well, but we're doing it to the top end with an infinite ratio with a very fast attack time, and the release time is also a bit fast. We're doing that to shave off any type of snares that are coming through too harsh. Now, this mix is asking for a softer touch. It doesn't really need to go like that. And you can go. And what it's shaving off is at 8 kilohertz. So where is 8 kilohertz on an EQ graph? It's around here-ish. I found that it was a bit too harsh. So this is a limiter setup, and this is a compressor setup. Just to give you some terminology, limiter because it's a ratio of infinite to 1, meaning that if any top ends comes over at 8 kilohertz, the limiter is going to go whop, pop, 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 get out of my way, and makes it nice and smooth. In this box of dynamics, so let's go tip number 4 already. You already have something called a color compressor as well, which is really, really nice. So if you're listening overall to your track and you're going like, you know, I really could use a little bit of volume in my track, you can use the color compressor to add some loudness. Anyway, it doesn't work right now, but what you can do is add loudness. So you basically add some volume, and you can add some saturation too. I'm gonna just turn that limiter back on, and then add something called color. I know there's a volume compensation there, but it's a really nice little saturation thing to have, and it actually sounds pleasant. So if you want, don't add the loudness thing. I take that back. Add the saturation thing and then add color. The color, you go 0.5 and up is going to be more top end focus. If you go 0.5 and down, it's going to be more low end focus. So it's a really fast shelving EQ to kind of go on your overall mix. If you find that, you know, something is too loud or too this, you fixed all that and you still find the reference has more or less low end, you can adjust this color knob accordingly with the saturation, and then you have a beautiful saturated, warm, bathy type of feeling on the track itself. Okay, let's get out of this module. Let's look at something else. Let's look at, well, modulators. Obviously, that goes together, right? Let's go into some more advanced stuff. So let's go into tip number 5. Really advanced sidechaining. That's my next one. All right, so for tip number 5, you can use an envelope follower as the sidechain. So you don't have that pumpy effect. So you take your envelope follower, put it onto the kick drum, because we're going to be sidechaining the low end, right? Then we're going to take an EQ8 and put that onto the bass, just because it's a standard procedure. And then we're going to modulate this so that every single time the kick drum hits, this goes down and back up accordingly. Easy peasy. I'm going to take the adapt EQ off and just let it go like this instead. All right. So what do we need to do is we need to take the gain knob and turn that up and down according to this. So we're going to click on map here. Boop. Map there. I'm going to click on bass and click on gain knob. And now if I play it back, the envelope follower will move this up and down. Watch it there. That's not the exact thing that we want. We want the exact opposite of that. So what are we going to do? We are going to adjust the envelope so it does the opposite. We're going to go 50% to 0%. Now, every single time the kick drum hits, this gets turned down. Now we can put it exactly for 39 hertz, because that's exactly where the bass is. And then every single time I need space there in that kick drum area, it gets taken care of. How easy is that? But remember, with envelope followers, so this is like an advanced sidechain, you can do a lot more. You can also, for instance, if you have vocals that are in the way, you can envelope follow the way. You know, you can do it for keys or for arpeggiators. I do suggest you keep it calm and keep it chill. But if you're like not that much into super sidechainy, the entire volume types of needs to get ducked down, an envelope follower is definitely the way to go. And remember, you can map a hell of a lot more stuff. So if you want to get very creative, you can, and start mapping, for instance, sends and things like that to create more of a rhythmical, awesome time to begin with. All right, so tip number 6, rhythmical. If you want to see this kind of stuff or more of this kind of stuff, check out youtube.com/catandbeats or patreon.com/catandbeats. Another shameless, selfless plug. Rhythmic-wise, let's say that you're bored with this, right? You're just like, okay, yeah, this is cool and everything, but it's kind of boring. Let me just adjust the envelope a bit. Let's just say, okay, this is cool, but rhythmically, it's boring me to death. Let's say it's the bass that's boring you to death. Let's do some crazy rhythmic bass stuff. Open up a return track. Open up the delay knob. Open up the grain delay. And let's also open up the spectral time. Now, the cool thing about Ableton is that they have a lot of flavors of delay. And I really, really like that. Specifically now with the spectral time, it will add a to it, which is really nice. Let's add in some feedback, add in some stereo information, add in the mix full, wet, dry, adjust the resolution. The higher you go, the resolution, the clearer everything will sound, but I don't want clear. I want dirty, weird stuff happening. Let's pull into this as hard as we can via the send. Have a listen. That's weird. It's nastier. Let's get some grain delay with the spray on it. That's nice and weird. I like that. Let's put a little bit of EQ so we can clean it up. And then we're going to add that back into the track. And then you have a different type of rhythm that's going to be playing at the same time as the sub. And you can create something a little bit more interesting. Now, I think it would probably be better if we would use the shaper type of option. Excuse me, I'm moving 10 million times too fast probably. So audio effects, you can make your own modulator. You can use a shaper and then shape that. Here's the shaper. Shape that to the utility. And then you can get that hardcore sidechaining thing going on. Now let's add that back in. Hey, not the prettiest thing. Let's get rid of this. Kind of push that in there somewhere. Not the prettiest thing, but there's something there that's like a bit more interesting. It's a little bit strange. Tip number 7. If you want to get more into this really weird blending of sound, I highly suggest checking out the spectral time and the other spectral blur as well. It will add a sort of mid-forward sound to your track, and you can plop that into a send, and then you'll have this nice little strange washy oddness to it. It's not a quality thing to add to your track. It's more of a dirty thing to add to your track. Think drum code-esque type of things where it's just nasty and weird. Obviously, this track is not drum code-esque. It's just kind of whatever that other one's called that everybody's raging around about. But if you want more of a dirty thing, then spectral is going to be really nice. And I really suggest driving that on here, and then you have a rhythmical element to whatever you're putting into it. And with spectral blur, you're going to get a nasty, gritty, weird sound that you can't quite put your finger on. Okay, let's move on to tip number 7. Speaking of sends, there's a nice little tip here for the top end. Okay, so with this top end thing here that's already there, because I've put it there already. Let's just plop everything open. If I turn it on and off, I'm just gonna exaggerate it. It's a nice little trick to do. Now, normally you would have something that's called Type A. It's a tape encoder, but we don't really have a tape encoder, and I'm not going to be remaking that with the multiband dynamics of Ableton 11 because Ableton 11 is a bit of a mess when it comes to multiband dynamics. But with a little bit of overdrive, a little bit of saturation, specifically putting that into the top end, and then driving it hard, toning it hard, and leaving the dry, wet, and the dynamics this way, and putting that for this. And then if you turn that on and off, it's just that little bit of a breath of fresh air on your track. So if you find that your track is lacking a little bit of top end, if you just send some top end elements, let's see if I have every send. So I have a send on the clap and the snare here. Well, this is basically all that's added. And it will literally bring life to your track. I'm gonna really extremely make it too much now. It's like almost like a different song. So I would drive into that, and then once you've driven into that, then take the volume down and then put the volume back up until you go like, yeah, that's about right. Because it can be a little bit too much, which is okay if it's too much. Now, let's go to tip number 8 already, and let's just pick one at random because I haven't found a nice little segue to the next one in my head yet. This is a fun one. With reverb, if you find things that are too forward, and I find this over and over and over and over in mixes, it's okay to splash reverbs around in your track. All right? So the first one is, how do you know if something is too forward in a mix? If you're listening to your song and you reference it to another song, so you click A, B, and you click on A, and that's the reference song, and you click on your song, that song just seems like the vocal is really sitting nicely in the mix. It's like in there. It's not up front, it's in the mix. And when I do this, that means that the reverb isn't set up correct in your mix, which means things are really popping out in front when you can push them back into the mix. Now, why do I keep doing this? When you have reverb onto a track directly or onto a group, what will happen is that if I increase the reverb, then it goes more into the back of the room. The further I move away from the microphone, the more in the back of the room I result into. Look, I'll give you an example. Hello, 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 hello. Now I'm back in your head, right? So you need to see the dry wet control of a reverb. It doesn't really matter which reverb right now. It's about the concept here. You need to see the dry wet control as a push something towards the back or into the mix if something is too forward. You'll know exactly what I mean when you listen to a vocal playback and it's extremely dry. It just sounds a little bit awkward. Most of the time, you can go a lot wetter than you think with a vocal. Also with like a lead sound that's going to go beep, 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 beep. You know, and it's all like right in front of your face, and the whole mix sounds really nice, and then that lead is just like, what the fuck is this? Try putting on a little bit of reverb directly onto the track. Tip number 9. What about, I don't really like having that much reverb directly onto the track, and everything already sounds quite in the mix, but there seems to be some sort of lacking overall glue and specificity together. Well, then, this is an old trick, you can use a reverb overall. And in this time, it becomes really cool to try out the new hybrid reverbs. Because when you try out the new hybrid reverbs, then you can start adding in a sort of space. So we as humans are extremely sensitive to reverb. You can hear reverbs through your phone, you know, like if somebody's on the bathroom. So we're really sensitive to it. So if you just listen to your song and be like, where would this song take place? You know, or what kind of vibe do I need to get? I was feeling a vibe of kind of under a bridge because we're in the middle of Corona time of this track. If I take this off, all of a sudden that vibe kind of goes away. See? And it's okay to use like a 20-second decay time here. It's fine. You need to find the vibe that works for you. And that vibe then kind of completely makes everything sound nice and sexy together. Okay? So that's the 2 different ways of reverb, and that's already tip 9. So we're going to go to tip number 10. Okay, tip 10. Hi-hats annoy me sometimes because people do the following with hi-hats. They'll say this with hi-hats. They'll get an EQ out, or they'll use an EQ'd sample, and it'll just be a whole bunch of this. Like hi-hat, high cut, and then you only have 10 kilohertz playing back. That's so weird. What you can do to kind of make the sound more soft and more nice, and to introduce artificial frequencies down here, is use something called a vocoder. All right? So with a vocoder, what will happen is you start introducing a little bit of noise. So here you have a dry wet knob. Add in a little bit. I suggest using the 8-band for this. Get rid of the top 2, for instance, and then add a little bit of... And all of a sudden, from a hi-hat, all of a sudden you'll see a little bit of low end coming in. Let's actually do that together, because you're probably interested in it. Okay, so let's say that, let's just make the common mistake, yeah? Hi-hat needs to have nothing of this. Okay, so for instance, that would be the hi-hat. In my ears, that would sound extremely weird because not everybody has bat hearing. Okay, so then we'll take a vocoder. Then I'm going to put it on 8. Then I'm going to take another EQ. Then I'm going to show you what this thing will do. So take the dry wet. That's the sound, right? That's not really nice for me. Take away the top end. You can hear it coming in. And you can kind of adjust how it sounds. And there's some more low in it. So stop looking at the EQ actually, because that's not really showcasing it. But that's going to translate better than that, for instance. Okay, but you know the type of hi-hats I mean, like the trap hi-hats. Like in trap step and things like that, they will have that kind of sound with the and it's like, if you need some weight as well. Okay, so that's a vocoder tip right there. You can also, with the vocoder, so let's just make it tip 9.A. With the vocoder, you can also adjust release times. So instead of it going like you can go, and you can make that like a whole cool sound to have. All right, let's go to tip number 10, and that's about harmonics and driving. So this whole thing is absolutely the bee's knees and a half. They all have different types of flavors and different types of sexiness to them, and I really, really like this. So what are harmonics and when do you need them? If you have a sound that is not coming across right. So if we are looking at sound for an example, so if you have a bass that just goes here, and it's just a sub, right? It's nothing interesting. You're going to need some type of saturation so that it's going to be audible, that bass here or here or here, or basically on top of this area. Because not everybody will have this beautiful sub bass playing back in their headphones and or their speakers. And most people will listen to the song like this. Speaking of, music lives in the mids. So if you want your bass to translate as well, make sure that it's living in the mids too. So I'd suggest a little bit of saturation. Now, the cool thing is there is so much color to choose from, and all saturators will introduce harmonics on top of this. You're gonna can have even or odd harmonics or inharmonic or harmonic. It's all the same thing. And I highly suggest you just try out like dynamic tube or try out a cabinet, try out a drum bus, try out an amp, try a couple of them out, see how they sound and how they feel for you on sounds that are very low and heavy, do not have almost anything going on here. That is going to sound great with a little bit of saturation or a lot of saturation. And tip number 11, and this is my main tip to everybody. You have mixing in two ways. You have mixing like a janitor, where you clean everything up and you strip away the soul from your track. And you have mixing like you have never heard me speak before, where you break every single rule there is to break. I highly suggest that you do a clean mix, and then after that, find an element, and then find an element in your track and in yourself where you go, that's the one that I'm going to break every single rule. I'm going to distort my reverb with a redux. I'm going to take a lead and pan it completely to the left. I don't give a about the right. I'm going to take, all these strange things that you would normally not do. That emotional level of mixing where you break all the rules, emotional intent, is where you can make or break your song really fast. So I suggest you break the rules there, have a fantastic time. And I'm going to call this the 11 Ableton tips in Ableton 11 kind of mixing tips. My name is Guido over from Cat and Beats. Shameless plug number 3. Come over and check that place out. It's always fun to have people. And I'll see you guys again. Cheers. Much love. Take care. Peace out. Leave a like, subscribe. If you have any questions, I'll actually be in the comment section. And I hope you had a fun time following along.